Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, please send in your greetings. Please tell us where you're watching from, and please send us your questions and comments. We love to hear from you and we love to read them out, because this is the show where we're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together. And if that's you, please keep watching, and if that's not you, please keep watching anyway, because you might learn something. Folks, we are teleprompter free on this great British evening. As always, please do send in your comments. Nice to see people coming in there on TikTok as well, and we do love our TikTok army of friends, acquaintances and colleagues who've always got something to say on TikTok. This is the show, folks, where we're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together, if you didn't hear that on TikTok. So please do let yourself be heard and we will read you out. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, please do smash that thumbs up button. Please do give us a share if you're watching. And on Facebook, smash the like and also give us a share. And on Twitter, please give us a repost. And let's get this message far and wide and heard, because goodness knows the pro-UK voice must be heard amid all the chaos and noise. We cut through to the essential facts, the things that need to be heard to keep our fantastic country on the road. Somebody on TikTok says the empire is finished. Well, largely, however, there still are the Commonwealth realms, which are the areas where the king is still the king. There are the British Overseas Territories, 14 of them, which are different from the Commonwealth realms, and we're still holding on as a potential force for good in the world. But Hollywood Hulkamania says it seems now that NATO is our empire. That's an interesting point, and that actually brings me in quite nicely to a point of view which I was reading today about the potential of the United Kingdom rejoining the European Union. And it was an article which I have here by a commentator called Ambrose Evans Pritchard. And he was saying, and I don't actually follow or agree with this, but he was saying that if Trump were to win the election in November in America, then he would pull out of supporting NATO. I don't think that's likely at all, although I know that he makes these mischievous comments now and again that he's going to. I think he just does that in order to try to get the European countries to pay their way, because the US spends 3.5% or something like that of its budget on NATO, whereas the European countries only spend an average of 2% of their particular budget on NATO. So he's playing fast and loose a bit, saying, implying that if he were to win, then he'd come out of NATO. But I think in the real world that's very unlikely. But what this has done is it's given a fresh boost to the pro-EU people, because the way they look at it is they want Britain to rejoin the EU, and they see this helps to actually explain a few things, because I've been puzzled by watching on Twitter mainly and seeing that the anti-Putin people, the people who are very much for Ukraine, are also for rejoining the European Union. So there's a connection here between the anti-Putinists, the people who are for continuing the Ukraine war, and also at the same time rejoining the EU. And I was wondering, why are they like that? What's the connection there between the two? And basically, by pushing the idea that Europe is threatened by Putin, what they're hoping is that the British will rejoin the EU in some sort of emboldened European Union. And it was explained here by Evans Pritchard. He says, the push for EU rapprochement will come from a Labour Party that has been elected at the general election, and that has for now ruled out the EU customs union or the single market, but which has not emotionally come to terms with Brexit. And the pull will come from Brussels and EU capitals in panic over what could be their naked Eastern Front if the US pulls out of NATO. In other words, these EU capitals will be really encouraging Britain to rejoin again. And of course, under a Starmer premiership, could that happen? This is the thing. At least one person that he spoke to here believes so. The person he spoke to says, the trajectory is very obvious. If Europe is going to have a serious military capability, then they have to get the Brits back on board. They need our defence industry and research capacity, says Andrew Duff, a former Euro MP and fellow at the European Policy Centre in Brussels. So he seems to be hoping for that trajectory. He continues, once there is a defence treaty, there will be lots of spillovers. Keir Starmer will discover that it is hard to tinker with the edges of the UK-EU trade deal, and that it makes more sense to go back into the customs union. That in turn spills over into the single market and the free movement of capital and services, and this could happen very fast. The logic is to go back into the EU completely, and that is what Starmer will do in his second term, suggests Andrew Duff, fellow at the European Policy Centre in Brussels. So we just got to be careful about that. That is a possibility. It also explains why the pro-EU people are talking up the Russian threat in order to get, quote-unquote, the Brits back on board with some sort of EU defence treaty. All of that thought sparked by the gentleman's comment there about NATO. Thank you for raising that point. Talking about the European Union, I was having a wee conversation with somebody earlier today, and they were just noticing the lack of dentists in the country, at least dentists that will practice on the NHS. This was never a problem in the 1970s, never a problem in the 1980s. Everybody was an NHS dentist. My father was an NHS dentist and provided NHS dentistry, not private dentistry, all his working life. And he was always able to see emergencies immediately. And you never had to wait for more than 10 days, maybe 14 days at the very, very most. But he used to say that if he was booked up a week in advance, that's all that he was asking for. And that was, he was the only one of two dentists at the time in the town that we lived in. Now, I tried to get an appointment for a filling that I need done last week, and I was told basically that the dental practice that I applied at, they said we're not taking any new people on the NHS anymore. So if you wanted to get it done, it would have to be private, which of course is a completely new dimension. We've never had that before. Speaking to this person, their little boy had a problem with his tooth, and it was put off, and the dental practice couldn't book him in for weeks in advance, and eventually the mother insisted that it was an emergency, went in to the dentist had a look at it and said he might have to lose the tooth. So this is the ridiculous situation that's occurring. That's real life consequences. Okay, we can talk on paper about the numbers of people coming into the country, this, that, and the next thing, but this is real life consequences. Okay, and I have no doubt that the reason, certainly in Scotland, certainly in the big cities, in Glasgow and so on, that there's no NHS dentists available is simply because of the sheer numbers of people now seeking appointments, that the NHS is overwhelmed by it. And like everything, if there was not the numbers of people, then everything would be easier. It would be easier to find a seat on the bus. It would be easier to drive into town. It would be easier to get a dental appointment. It most certainly would be easier to get a flat to rent anywhere in Scotland. And so it's coming to the stage now where we do have to talk about the levels of people in the country, and that is undoubtedly going to be the big political issue going forward. And as yet, none of the mainstream parties are geared up to even address what needs to be done properly. I was having another conversation with another person today from a media company, and I said basically what we need is a moratorium, and then we also need a remigration program to encourage people who want to go home. And by moratorium, I mean a complete end, not just to legal immigration, but to levels of asylum and, of course, illegal immigration as well, which shouldn't even be allowed in any way, shape or form. Now, of course, there'll still be certain levels of people coming in. There's going to always be marriages between people. There's always going to be a certain level of skilled work that needs to be done. But you can cut legal immigration way back. You can cut bogus asylum seeking way down, and you can start to address illegal immigration as well. And it simply just requires a government that has the will to do it and has the people who can articulate the necessity and who stand by doing it. And at the moment we don't have that as yet, but we will get it eventually because it has to be done. Somebody contacted me on Twitter and said how depressed they were for the future and for their children and so on, and I said, don't be depressed. Every generation has its challenges that it must face. This is our one, and we will win it, and we will make a better country at the end of the day. So don't be depressed about things, because everything is in the hands of man to change. There's nothing that's out with our ability to change things for the better. We just need the people with the ideas, and we also need to spot the people who are trying to suppress the ideas as well, because they know also how change happens, and it comes ultimately from words, because without words there can be no action. So when people are trying to censor your words, they're trying to stop you from making the change that's necessary. The person here who's saying, what about this, the extent to which Westminster is corrupt? Well, there are elements of Westminster, of course, which very much fall short, and when it does, we need to change these things, and we need to set our aspirations a lot higher but there is concern about the extent to which politicians are in the pockets of various vested financial interests. I think everybody shares those concerns. That doesn't mean, though, that we want to break up the United Kingdom and set the people of the United Kingdom against each other. It doesn't mean that we want to break up our country. It means that we need to root out the corruption and aim for something better in our one big country, which is the name of our book here. One Big Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1, the first of 5 that are projected. And you can find this book by going on to Amazon and simply searching for One Big Country. And it is the book to have. Very easily read. You can read it in 2 or 3 hours. And it really gets to the heart of the matter. Great book, great book. Every home should have one. Well, what is it about the energy bills? Somebody said some people can't afford their energy bills. Well, there are big issues there with the energy bills, one of which, of course, is the SNP and its unwillingness to create cheap energy. Scotland sits on coal. Scotland sits on natural gas. It would be very easy to frack the gas. It would be very easy to have our own coal for British industry to the extent that we still need that. All of these things are prohibited by the Scottish National Party. So, yes, we do need to address the extent to which some of these energy companies are building up huge profits. But we also need to address the energy at source. And Scotland sits on masses of cheap energy. But unfortunately, the SNP and the Green partners are turning their backs on that. And we're all suffering as a consequence of that. As well as the fact, of course, that the Americans or whoever blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which hasn't helped either. That's ridiculous, isn't it? Our own people blew that up to impoverish us. Think about that. Oh my. Well, talking about government policies, we are very likely to get a Labour government in after the general election this year. And Alan Cochrane made a good point here. He said, Labour must stop dancing to the SNP's tune. Telegraph of the 5th of November 24. Sorry, 5th of February 2024. And he is saying to Keir Starmer, and I'm going to read it out because it's very good advice. What we need is for Starmer's candidates in this year's election to be prepared to fight a positive campaign in support of the Union and affirm that the maintenance of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom is its best hope of economic and social advancement. Absolutely. Affirm that the maintenance of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom is its best hope of economic and social advancement. And he references some Labour people who are predicted to get in again, who may possibly be good spokesmen on that matter, including Douglas Alexander, Michael Shanks and Ian Murray. And then he says, but will there be some too scared to attack what he's calling independence for fear of stirring up nationalist support? The best way of avoiding that would be a stirring declaration in favour of the Union from both Starmer and Sarwar. That way we would have the chance, once and for all, to bring an end to the interminable constitutional wrangle that has bedevilled Scottish politics forever. Well, very possibly so, although there's never a once and for all in politics, of course, as I'm sure he knows. But one good way, as he says, is to definitely concentrate on the positive, to come up with good ideas to keep the social, the cultural, the political, the economic union together. And you know, That's what we're all about here at A Force for Good. We wrote 102 policies doing exactly that in our magazine, Do More Together, which you can buy at our shop, which is A Force for Good shop-1. You'll get that at our shop. That needs to land on every MP's desk in an ideal world. Something that really needs to land on Starmer's desk, and we need to get round to doing that. You know, we're going to do that. Starmer and Sarwar, they need to read this book. They absolutely need to read One Big Country. We even have a chapter, 3 easy win policies for the Union. Something that can immediately be done by any government coming into Westminster, including brand UK payments British, which means overhaul the bland communications from HMRC so people know that their welfare, the furlough payments, all of these things are coming not from Humza Yousaf, but coming from all of the British people sharing their resources, pooling and sharing their resources. That's what keeps us all going. And stopping the civil service, of course, promoting the India agenda. Again, that's a battle that needs to be done. And Lord Foulkes, who is a Labour man himself, has been at the forefront of that, and I'm glad to see that he's not giving up on that. Good for him. It's the bottom of the hour, so it's time for On This Day in British History. So on this day in British history, a Great Britain was born. On this day, the 21st of February in 1967, a child was born who would go on to become loved and appreciated, especially by us Scottish Unionists. He was born in Renfrew, and we're talking about none other than the great, the fantastic, the wonderful Neil Oliver, born on this day in Renfrew in 1967. And he came out just prior to the Scottish election very much as a pro-UK man, as a British patriot, and we're so glad to have him on side. And he's written some tremendous articles, some of the stuff that we've already quoted in our magazines and also in our wee book for the Union. And let's stick up one or two of his quotes here, and we'll talk about them. That was an article that he published in the Daily Mail on the 28th of November back in 2020. He says, "I was born British, and as a British citizen, I'll live out my days." Absolutely, mate. "My nationality is a state of mind, and I have no intention of changing either. I know who I am and what I love, and what I love is Britain, the whole place, every nook and cranny. This is my island." Excellent sentiment. Excellent sentiment there from our man, Neil Oliver. Okay, let's have another quote from the man. "What will it take before we realise what a precious place this Britain is? When will we see it, as others do, as an elegant cruise liner afloat on a storm-tossed, shark-infested sea? Places like this don't just happen. This Britain is the product of millennia of strife, and it's a safer, better place to be than anywhere else on earth." That's right, places like this don't just happen. They are created. They are created. And that brings us to the next quote from him as well. "Breaking something into pieces is infinitely easier than the act of creation. The Union has been the work of centuries, taken on and completed by countless selfless people, statesmen, soldiers, common citizens. And he continues, the Union is a dream shared by a people and kept real only by their imagination and conviction. If we neglect to maintain it, the temple will fall. If we neglect to maintain it, the temple will fall. We quoted that in our little book, and he went on to say that all of it will be destroyed, and so the work of centuries will be undone. And that was his article on the 1st of May, Union Day, British Union Day, 2016, in the Sunday Times, Scotland. Wise words, because countries don't just exist by virtue of existing. They are created things, and they can be destroyed. And people can destroy them, sometimes deliberately, or sometimes by simply not looking out for it. But we can't ever imagine that the country that we love is always going to be there. It might not be there. It can be destroyed. And sometimes people want to destroy it. And we've got to be careful about that. We've got to be wise to that and see those things. Like America's being destroyed right now. Is being destroyed deliberately by the people who have got into positions of cabinet in Joe Biden's government. Because I don't know if everybody knows this, but in America, the cabinet is appointed. In Britain, Rishi Sunak, or whoever is the Prime Minister, appoints his or her cabinet from the ranks of the elected MPs. In America, the president, as if he were a king, simply appoints the cabinet. And the cabinet can be made up of anybody who is a political activist. And right now they appointed somebody called Alexander Mayorkas, who's not even an American. He's an immigrant from Cuba. And they elected him to be the Secretary for Homeland Defense. And he's just decided to open the borders and destroy America, to bring in people who will simply vote out in time will replace the American core which has hitherto existed. So that's ongoing, and there's people who want to do the same thing to the United Kingdom, and let's be wise to that, is all I can say on that matter. Derek's enjoying the show. Great show again from the team. Keep up the good work. Thank you. And let me just give a shout out to the team, because there are people behind the scenes who are making sure that this is going smoothly on all our social media platforms. And there's people helping with the banners and the pictures and so on. So thank you to the team as always. As you know, we can't do this without each one of us continuing to do this. And thank you to all the viewers, of course. You are why we're here. British Legends says, Humza Yousaf is clear that independence is his number one priority. He wants to turn the general election into a proxy vote on independence. And British Legends goes on to say that in seats across Scotland, it's only the Scottish Conservatives who can beat the SNP and get the focus back on Scotland's real priorities. In some seats, as you say, sir, they are in second place. They would be the priority in those seats, no doubt, for some people, and in others it's Labour or the Lib Dems. And I should say, we're not supporting as a party, we're not as an organisation, we're not supporting any party, but we're definitely not supporting the SNP and Greens, because the thing is, us Unionists are a mixed bunch from all political walks of life. Shankill Loyalist says, I'm Scottish but I live in Northern Ireland. I'm a Unionist, always will be. Well, good to hear. Good to hear that, sir. I hope you're enjoying things over there in Northern Ireland, but you got a tough battle over there, not what with all this nonsense about the Irish sea border and the disgrace, in fact, of that. That should never have ever happened. British Legend says, Well, thank you, British Legend, says Alistair. True British legend. Keep up the good work. I love A Force for Good. Thank you. Thank you. Talking about Northern Ireland, I'm going to say something that some of our friends on TikTok might not like, but this is in fact the truth. I was reading this article, very good article, which I'll get into right now. The church must not turn a blind eye to the impact of mass migration on Britain. And when I saw the title, I thought, oh, is this going to be some sort of apology for mass immigration? But it's quite the opposite. It's by Lord Carey, former Archbishop of Canterbury, and he does seem a very sensible man, very sensible. Something I just want to mention, though, he's talking about immigration and how Britain's a welcoming country and that we've been composed of immigrants over many hundreds of years. Well, not really, to be frank with you, but I know where you're coming from. In fact, that reminds us we must get this article out. We wrote this big, long history of immigration to Britain, and we need to repurpose it for the website, and we must do that. We'll do that this coming week. Anyway, he goes, as an example, he says, my paternal grandfather came from County Cork in Ireland at the beginning of the last century, seeking work and settling down here. That's not immigration, right? If you were an Irishman at the beginning of the 20th century and you came to Britain, you're not an immigrant. Because prior to the 6th of December 1921, what we now call the Irish Republic, what we're now obliged to think of as a foreign country, that was part of the United Kingdom. So if you were an Irishman coming to Britain prior to 1921, you were not an immigrant. You were simply a British citizen, indeed a British subject, migrating internally within the United Kingdom. So it's not correct to talk about that big period of Irish migration as immigration. That's not immigration. That was just internal migration within the British Isles. This article by Liam Halligan, Immigration, Not Economy is Key to Election Success, published around the same time. In fact, on the same day. That's interesting, on the same day. And he says, coming from immigrant stock myself, etc., etc. Well, I'm presuming he means, with a name like Liam Halligan, I'm presuming he means he came from Irish stock. But again, depends when your parents or grandparents, well, grandparents in his way, depends when they came over. Because if they came over before 1921, I'm not going to be calling them immigrants. I'm just going to be calling them British subjects who came over to another part of the United Kingdom. How's that? How's that for a point of view? And if you disagree with me on TikTok, please tell me. Please tell me. So, politically what that means is that when politicians today go, oh, we've always had immigration, look at all the Irish who came. No, that's not immigration. That's just internal migration in the United Kingdom. So you can discount all of those numbers as immigration. Because it's not. Immigration is coming from outside the United Kingdom into the United Kingdom. That's immigration. People moving between islands in the British Isles is not. Prior to 1921 was certainly not immigration. So, but other than that, everything else that Mr. Carey, Archbishop Carey, says is absolutely correct. And he says he's been immigration skeptical for a long time. And he refers to something back in 2010 called the Balanced Migration Group, of which he signed their declaration, which called on the major parties to make manifesto pledges to prevent the UK's population reaching 70 million in under 20 years, as it was forecast to at the time. How wrong we were, not as it turns out in making the declaration, but in trusting official projections. According to the Office for National Statistics, we will reach that 70 million figure at least 4 years early. By mid-2036, we are now projected to grow to almost 74 million. And that's official figures, so the real figures are almost certainly going to be higher by the time 2036 rolls around. And that means that our politicians they're not running a country. They're just simply running. Well, what exactly are they running? They're just keeping the borders open, and they have no idea, they have no intention of keeping the population even at a particular number. You know, if you want to run schools, hospitals, if you want to calculate the number of dentists that you need, the number of the roads that you need, the transport facilities, then you need to know what the population's going to be, and you need to work to that. But you shouldn't be like a donkey chasing a carrot at the end of its nose. You should be saying, if you're a politician, we are going to have a population policy where this is going to be the number of people in the country. We're not going to let it go above that. If we see trends that make it go above that, we're going to make sure that we intervene to stop those trends. If we see numbers burgeoning in such a way that we're going to exceed what we believe is the correct carrying capacity of the country, then we're going to put the brakes on. But we don't even have that. We don't have any sense that our politicians are trying to aim for a number or trying to keep it within a certain number. There's literally no population policy. Now, we did write an article about the importance of a population policy. You'll find the link in the threads. But that's should be the very first thing that a government does. It says, we think we're going to keep the population at 65 million or something like that. You know, at least have a figure, and we're not going to go above it. And all the parties should come up with a population policy and tell us what they think the population should be. And if they're not willing to do that, then they should not be getting our vote. And if they do come up with a figure, then they've got to justify why that's a good figure, why that's the correct figure, why it's as high as that, or in some cases as low as that, but almost certainly it's going to be a high figure. They've got to justify it, and then we can have a debate, then we can know what they're aiming at. But at the moment, it's just like what's happening in America, is just flood the country with lots and lots and lots of people, and let's just see what happens. Well, that's no policy at all. That's just anarchy. And in the very worst situation, that is going to destroy the nation itself. And we can't have that. We can't go on like that. So something must change, and something will change. And much as it looks, much as we don't necessarily see a way out at the moment, I do believe that things are going to change quite quickly. So we keep optimistic in that sense. We've been writing quite a bit these winter months on our website, aforceforgood.uk. We put out an email update last night wherein we listed the 6 articles, 6 articles which have gone up in the last 3 weeks, including our speech, The Britishness of Scotland, which we gave to a group here in Glasgow 3 weeks ago. We're putting out all the history articles. We're putting out all the history articles that we published on our legacy site. We're repurposing them for aforceforgood.uk. And we're also putting together a big section on immigration now. We've written a lot about this in the past, none of which has ever been published on aforceforgood.uk or our legacy site. We're going to revisit all the stuff that we did back between 1999 and 2009, where we wrote heavily on this matter, and we'll repurpose all that material, bring it up to date, and make sure it gets out there at aforceforgood.uk. In this article here, the church must not turn a blind eye to the impact of mass migration on Britain. Archbishop Carey says, "So my concern and attention is also for those affected by a severe lack of housing and services," just what we were talking about earlier in the show. "A situation which is reaching breaking point in poorer areas, Absolutely. And I know that for a fact. The elites are well protected, but Britain's poorest have a different experience. An experiment in mass immigration has been foisted upon them without their consent, changing their lives and their communities. And that's really strong words from the former Archbishop there, and I'm glad that he said that. He's speaking about the current Archbishop, and he says that he agrees with him that the UK government should lead international talks aimed at reframing our international obligations on refugees. Absolutely. Because that's also a big area. There's so many people coming in claiming to be persecuted when they're not actually persecuted. They're simply economic migrants, and there's ways to deal with that as well, and the time is now to deal with that. And basically you deal with it by making it very awkward for those who are economic migrants to actually be able to find any economic value in the United Kingdom. I would urge political parties to make manifesto commitments to address this crisis. These should include measures to bring down numbers, but also ensure democratic consent and accountability. By which she means, quote, our politicians and church leaders should do much more to listen to the voices of those struggling communities which feel alienated and marginalised by unprecedented rates of immigration. And those seeking asylum should only be given that honour on the strict understanding that they must leave behind the political and moral structures of their former societies that are incompatible with the open democratic values of their new homes. Well, all of that is just common sense, really. But as we know, common sense isn't all that common these days. Well, I agree with Derek here. A constitution based on white Christian British values. Well, the Christian value thing is absolutely kind of forgotten about now, isn't it? But really that's at the key of the British identity. You know, modern Britain has been built upon those Christian values, and that's forgotten about now because of the secularization of society, but it still remains the fact. And we should have more courage to stand up for that against the non-Christian religions, all of them, who yeah, we should be standing strongly for the Christian religion and put it first, and other religions can be here and can practice, but they have to understand that it's the Christian values that come first. But all of that's been pushed to the wayside, and it's part of the reason why the country's in the state that it is, of course. And all sorts of bizarre things are happening today which would never have been tolerated in a strongly Christian country, and are only tolerated. And somebody was talking about how, you know, all this nonsense about males, you know, breastfeeding and just sick, perverted stuff, which is just paedophilia, basically, being tolerated. And that's because we don't live in a strong Christian society anymore. And in the old days, that would simply not have been tolerated, and it would have been punished. And when you lose that, then anything goes, and that's one of the problems that we're in the state that we're in. And it's okay to talk about politics and so on, but at the end of the day, it's like, what's the value system that you're building your politics upon? And if you don't have a value system to build your politics upon, then is your politics even worth anything? And will it ever prosper? I must do more about that. I must do more. I must write more about that, because that's becoming clearer to me as the world seems to fall apart these days. Now, talking about this book, if you bought this book, please can you, if you want, leave a review on Amazon. Okay, because the Nats come on and they leave their crazy reviews. The Nats don't buy it, but they leave their reviews, like 1-star reviews and so on. So if you've bought it and if you like it, please do write a review. That really helps. And if you think that there's politicians who need to see it, please buy a copy as well and send it to them, because it's often much more persuasive if it comes from you, the reader, rather than from us, the writer. Good. Folks, we're at the top of the hour. We're not going to be broadcasting next Wednesday. The reason for that is we have to take a week off to write issue 10 of our magazine Union Heart, which is going to be Busting Indie Myths Volume 2. And I think we'll call it More Myths Busted, or Indie Myths Busted, I think is what we'll call it. Indie Myths Busted. Volume 3 can be More Myths Busted. Anyway, we got to write that, and that requires a lot of intellectual effort. And so we need to do that next Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and so on. So that's what we'll be concentrating on next week. So we won't be able to broadcast next week, but please keep watching our channels and keep subscribing, folks. Thanks very much for all your help. So at the top of the hour, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's contributed tonight. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the King. See you next time.